This is Viz, and with us today, out in San Diego way, is Dr. Ellen Lacter, a licensed clinical psychologist who's also involved with the University of California at San Diego. And tell us, Doc, what do you do out there?
I do continuing education classes in play therapy and ritual abuse.
And that's what has brought us together, is the work that you've done in the area of ritual abuse. Something that we've done from time to time, but we want to get a greater body of speakers to the issue. I think sometimes people out there, your average person in the street, is a bit reluctant to believe that this takes place, and it's a little harder sell for people to come across and realize this is a very hideous thing that's taking place, and it's an ugly little secret in America, and also around the globe, is it not?
Yes, it happens everywhere. It's been happening everywhere for thousands of years in one way or another.
What do you want to focus on? We use the umbrella term ritual abuse, but specifically regarding your work, how do you want to start this?
Well, I'd really like people to understand that this is real. There's been a very organized propaganda campaign to discredit survivors and discredit psychologists who are exposing this, and to even discredit law enforcement and district attorneys who've tried to do something about this. And so I'd like to help the truth get out there that this is a huge problem, that many people are affected. I believe in San Diego that there's probably well over 1,000 children being abused horribly in cult practices here, and I don't think San Diego's any worse than any place else.
This may be happening on several levels, I'm assuming. But it is systemic, isn't it, at one point?
Systemic meaning...
it's been ongoing. In my terms, I'd say it's been ongoing. It's very entrenched. There's a network involved, and I'll leave it there.
I think there's multiple networks involved. I think that one of the mistakes on the Internet that is kind of put out there is that it's one organized network and that they're all working together and that there's just one very powerful group trying to dominate the world. I don't believe that. I believe that there are a number of different organized groups that all have the agenda of ruling the world. So there's the satanic network, and I don't believe that that is all networked, just like the witchcraft network. And when I say witchcraft, I don't mean Wicca. I'm talking about ritually abusive, sacrificial witchcraft cults. They, too, are somewhat organized into a hierarchy, just like the Satanism, but then there are also smaller groups kind of working on their own, all also very well hidden. And then there's people that have more political agendas, maybe without any spiritual component, and some may have a spiritual component, but these are also groups that want to dominate the world and that abuse people and experiment and mind control in order to have their people never be able to tell or even never be able to remember what was done to them, and to be able to use those people toward their ends. So there's multiple groups, all using abusive practices and mind control to control their victims.
Maybe later on we can go back to some of the globalist levels on which this may take place.
Okay.
I want to ask you just one other sidebar question about groups, and I want to go back to what these individuals do suffer. Have you ever encountered, and I guess you could put this under the umbrella of Satanism, but have you encountered at all victims who have been abused by, say, supposedly secret occult societies like the OTO or AA or high-degree Freemasonry, anything like that at all?
People do often belong to things like OTO or Freemasonry. In a case of something like OTO, what do you mean by AA? What does that stand for?
That's another one that's even beyond OTO. I believe that's called Astro Organium.
Okay, I'm not familiar with that one.
Right.
Sometimes some of these groups have publicly acknowledged groups, like OTO is publicly a publicly out there group with a website.
Right.
So a typical victim may belong to something, or may have family members who belong to OTO, but the actual most binding abuse that was done to them would be a level deeper, would never be anything that would have a public, it may have a public cover, but that would not be truly representative of the most organized network involved in that group. So in other words, I think that the people who have family members who belong to OTO actually belong to something either smaller or bigger that's more binding, and also belong to this front organization.
All right, I just called up on the internet some of the names of AA, and it comes down to usually Argenium Astrum or Astrum Argenium, and you can take a look. Not that you need to know that there's another one out there, by all means.
Uh-huh.
We also had an author come on by the name of Craig Heimbichner, who wrote a book called Blood on the Altar.
Uh-huh.
It just was specifically about the OTO.
Uh-huh.
And just one other thing too, we've had on Peter Levenda, who's written a book called Unholy Alliance about a Nazi compound down in Chile that was engaged in in child ritual abuse and sacrifices and such, and it was not busted until just a little while ago because I guess Allende and Pinochet let it alone and basically protected it. I'm saying this because I want people to understand that what we're talking about is really global in capacity, and can be also happening next door to you.
Absolutely.
Now, but let's talk about the victims. Are they mostly children? Are they mostly females? I mean, is that some kind of a profile, or is it everything goes?
Are they most? If they are more female than male, it wouldn't be by too much.
Okay.
The females tend to end up in therapy and having severe anxiety disorders, post-traumatic stress disorder, and dissociative identity disorder. But the males will more often end up in prison and maybe a little less likely to end up in therapy, even though I think more and more of them are ending up in therapy now, it seems, the men.
This is going to be a bit unpleasant, but this is the reason we're doing this, to make people understand. I mean, this isn't gratuitous. It's necessary to make people believe. And the other thing I'll say, Doc, is I don't know your spiritual background, but I always go back to Jeremiah in the Old Testament when the Israelites were sacrificing their children to a stone owl named Moloch. And Yahweh came by and he said, it never entered my mind that you would do such a thing. My point is, I take that as truth, and I believe we have that still today, that evil does not get any more sophisticated. It's more debauched as it's always been. And it's hideous. And so, I mean, given that, can you tell us, though, what kind of damage have these people suffered? What has happened to them?
Well, usually beginning when they're very, very little, in infancy, they are tortured with the deliberate goal of creating dissociated identities. So the abusers are trying to do trauma that is so extreme that the person will create other personalities to hold the memory of that trauma so that the main personality, as it gets older, will be able to live and function without knowing what happened and looking somewhat normal, even though I don't think they look totally normal in most cases. So the torture is extreme, because it's only with that level of extreme torture that that kind of split is forced to happen in an individual. This isn't the kind of thing where the person, I think, chooses to create another identity. That can happen with abuse that starts later. This is the kind of thing where it's just forced because it's so overwhelming. So other identities are created, and then the abusers seek to control those identities and to hide all of their directives and memories in those hidden personalities, both hidden from the individual and, of course, hidden from other people. And this is usually done by the family members. So most times these children start out by being born into a family that has practiced this for generations. They've all been tortured since infancy. They torture their own young since infancy, and then later they may accept money from other groups to allow those other groups to program more hidden personalities toward their own agendas.
So this sounds a little bit like the MK Ultra project and some of the other projects where MPDs were used to, but they were used for a lot of reasons, weren't they? To commit certain crimes, or to be couriers, or to be sex slaves. Is that right?
What I am clear about is that those projects did a lot of experimenting, and I believe it's still going on. I believe that this whole use of mind control to try to make people do someone's bidding has been going on by a number of countries, including ours, the U.S., since the 40s or so. Now, I think that the research piece has always been a lot bigger than the usage piece. So I do believe there was also use. In other words, sometimes these people were used to do things, carry messages or have sex and carry a message. But I believe that the even now the experimentation piece is larger than the usage piece. I think they're just trying to fully develop as strong a capacity to control another person as they can, and are interested in seeing the extent to which they can do that. I'm not even sure how valuable the whole thing ultimately is for them. But I think I think our country and other countries are definitely in something of an arms race to master these techniques in case they need to use them. But how much they're actually sending these people on missions versus using these people to hone their art, I don't know.
So it would be your feeling that the greater amount of these cases are experimental, to see exactly what's more effective, etc.
Yeah, to develop the capacity to install mind control in a person's mind. I mean, so when we say experimental, I mean they're still torturing them and bringing them near death and creating personalities and asking them to do particular things. But the things that they ask them to do, I'm not sure how much they're actually doing them or how much they're doing them in a laboratory setting. I don't have corroboration to prove that they're actually going out. I have accounts from people that they've actually done things, and some of those sound really credible to me. But I do have corroboration for the fact that the torture is being used to install mind control.
We had on quite a few months ago Kathleen Sullivan, who wrote the book Unshackled, The Survivor's Story of Mind Control. And that was pretty riveting in that, and Harry, who's my partner and is not here today, when we were listening to her tell us that her father was a Nazi. They came over to Pennsylvania and actually melded in and disguised themselves as Pennsylvania Dutch rather cleverly in that area, and that she was raised up by her father to be a victim. And she did commit crimes. She was really bound by what she could say at the time, because she could obviously incriminate herself. And it was just really startling for us and very shocking to hear her. I mean, she's now on. You sound like you're familiar with her work, are you?
To some degree.
Okay. Now, it was just to hear her speak. I mean, she sounds like she's had a lovely life. A credit to, as she would say, her belief in Jesus Christ and the therapy she's gone through. But when you hear her in that voice of hope talk about such dark things, it's really very shocking for anyone to hear.
Yes, and that's how therapists are too. You listen to somebody discuss these things, and you can hear the pain in their voice, and the symptoms fit the pain, and the descriptions, and the whole thing is very, very convincing, but, I'm always very cautious for both legal reasons and for some other reasons to take the next step to saying, I know it's true. It can feel true, and we can be pretty sure it's true, but I reserve that level of knowing for things that I have proof for. So I'm not saying it's not true at all. It's just that I have to be very, very careful because there's tremendous pressure on us as clinicians to not believe any particular memory, and a lot of that was generated by the whole false memory movement.
Is it possible, or are you willing, to give us, shall we say, a case history anonymously where someone came in and you were aware of what had happened to him or her, and that someone was actually put on the road toward healing because of the work that you do? Is there something like that you can tell us about as far as the progression that way?
I can't describe a specific case because that would be, breaching confidentiality, even if I leave the name out, because just the details would be, I'd have to have a person's permission. But I can definitely say that, when just in general, when people come in, usually they have a lot of post-traumatic symptoms, horrible flashbacks, a lot of anxiety, a lot of physical pain that they may not totally understand, and then they would usually first begin to get memories of sexual abuse within their family, not including the ritual abuse part, but the more what we call garden variety sexual abuse, the kind that a lot of people experience without the spiritual overlay of worship of Satan or witchcraft deities, etc. And then over time, if the clinician is willing to let the client know that they know about other kinds of abuse, we have to kind of walk a fine line between giving them enough information to let them know that we know enough that we will believe them and that we can help them, and saying something that could ever be construed as leading or could cause the client to question their memories as they first come up because of something we said. So we have to be subtle, but yet help them feel safe to open up about that. And then they'll tend to begin to get the memories of a whole other level of abuse, which involves rituals and worship of deities and that kind of thing. And then there's usually, that becomes a very difficult road. Keith, can you hold on 1 second?
Sure.
Can we put this on hold for 1 second?
Sure.
I'm really sorry.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay, so then after the client gets the memories of the more typical sexual abuse in the family, then they'll start to get sometimes some memories of some ritual trauma. So they may remember more than one perpetrator being there and some kind of abuse that goes beyond regular sexual abuse. So maybe something of their body, a scraping of the skin or an ingestion of blood or chanting or a murder or a sacrifice of perhaps a small animal or something like that. And then they have a struggle for some time because the programming to never remember and never tell causes them to re-experience extreme pain physically and extreme states of anxiety and terror as they are beginning to tell this. So the road becomes more difficult at this point. They typically say, I made this all up. I've heard that 1,000 times. I must have made this all up. I made it all up. It's not true. Mm-hmm. That's usually directly related to programming. Sometimes that just comes from dissociation, that when a person has dissociated something horrible for so long, when they first get the memory, they're not sure whether to believe it or not. They needed to not believe it for a long time, and now that it comes back up, it can feel unreal. But a lot of times I must have made it all up or I must have dreamt it are the words that were told to them while they were being programmed mm-hmm. to make them question themselves. I would say that more than half of the abuse that happens to these people is to cause them to never remember and never tell, and the other half is toward the goal of that group. So if it's Satanism, it's toward empowering Satanism. If it's witchcraft, it's toward empowering the witchcraft deities. If it's an espionage group, it's toward their espionage goals. But more than half is to cause them to never remember and never tell. So their symptoms can increase. They can become suicidal. Sometimes they're even programmed to kind of make the therapist have to work really hard, to try to burn out the therapist, etc. There's a lot of programming to sabotage therapy. Sometimes they'll start falling asleep in sessions. That's also programmed in. All kinds of things are done. So it's at that point that the therapist really has to know how to work with the programming, which is something that even a lot of therapists who work with ritual abuse, or let's say maybe not the ones who are specialists in it, but the ones who say, yes, I believe it, and I've had clients who I'm sure this has happened to, they might not really know how to work with the programming, and that takes a lot of extra training. And if you can work with it, it's still a long haul because very often there's many levels of trauma, and the most binding trauma is the deepest and the last stuff that you often get to. So the person may first remember, let's say, some rituals, and then maybe they might even remember some espionage type of abuse. That will tend to come before the most deep ritual abuse. Witchcraft memories tend to be remembered later, so a person may even work through, let's say, dad was practicing Satanism and mom was practicing witchcraft, and the child was sold for one of the military espionage projects. They may get dad's Satanism and the military espionage stuff first, and then it may take a couple of years before they get to the witchcraft stuff, which is actually the stuff that's held most deeply in the unconscious. So it's a long haul with internal sabotage from programming to fight with the whole time. And most of these people, survivors, develop tremendous wisdom that this is going to be a long haul and that they're going to have to do a lot of work within themselves all the time. And having some kind of a spiritual source of strength is, I wouldn't say necessary, but almost necessary. It's extremely helpful. And support from other survivors, and it takes a whole network of help to go through this, and it is a life thing. It doesn't. You don't get to go in and have it done in a year. But some people can, within a couple of years, get to a pretty healthy level of strength and functioning and do okay. And some people actually manage to function pretty well throughout the whole process. They may be in a lot of pain, but they can function.
Is there? Well, first of all, let's tell everybody again who we're speaking with. This is the Grassy Knoll on Dade City Micro Radio, AM 1610 WDCX. This is Viz, and with us is Dr. Ellen Lacter from out in San Diego, who deals with victims of ritual abuse. You have a website out there. It's a heck of a long URL.
I know.
But what we'll do is this. We'll say, do a search on Ellen Lacter. That's Lacter, Dr. Ellen Lacter, plus Truth Be Known, and that'll get you out to the URL, because it is truthbeknown2000.tripod.com /truthbeknown2000/ID20. Well, then it goes on and on and on. But anyway, and also even if you just go to the .com part of it, it will get you to your basic practice, and you can link to that other website from there, can't you?
Yes, and they can email me. Anybody can email me. It's Ellen Lacter, ELLENLACTER @earthlink.net, and then I'll get them to the place they need to go.
All right. Now, one of the offenders seems to are these religious, quasi-religious, occult groups. You had informed me about a situation that was taking place down in Louisiana.
Yes.
Were you drawn to that by any means? What was going on? What was the name of the church down there?
Let me see.
Hosanna?
Hosanna Church,
Yeah.
yeah, and it was in something with a P. The name of the town was with a P.
It's a name that's Indian, but it's around in and around New Orleans and Baton Rouge.
Mm-hmm.
Right, and did that peak?
It's Ponchatoula. Ponchatoula. Yeah.
Did that draw your attention for any particular reason?
Well, I'm an activist against this, against ritual abuse and mind control, and so I'm part of a network of people who all give us information as soon as it breaks, and we're all really happy whenever there's some kind of, whenever these people are caught, whenever something finally hits the newspaper, and when the media has the guts to acknowledge some of the ritualistic aspects of the abuse. What tends to happen is that the media and the DA's office only acknowledges the sexual or physical abuse of children and leaves out the ritualistic elements, and that doesn't help get the truth out. But in this case, they acknowledge the sacrifice of animals and the fact that this is a pretty large network of perpetrators, and so I'm glad that got out there. Now I also doubt that this particular group is a very sophisticated ritual abuse group, because they did get caught and they did get arrested. Most of the perpetrators of the most organized abuse never get arrested, and they raise their kids to have jobs in law enforcement. They raise their kids to have jobs at Child Protective Services, in the district attorney's offices, etc. So they have their own network established in the institutions to erase records, to disbelieve these reports. They have a very organized, never let it come out campaign.
With law enforcement and also with, let's take it one at a time. I'm thinking also about the press. The press is not wont to shed much light on this sector of American life, is it?
Well, that's the other thing I should have added, is that they infiltrate the press. So the most organized groups have raised some of their children to be reporters who definitely write articles saying none of this is true, these therapists are crazy, these survivors are victims of their therapists putting memories in their minds, and so the media is very influential, and it is one of their main ways of keeping the truth from being exposed.
I was also wondering, too, if some of the media moguls aren't involved in some of these situations and don't want any light, obviously, shed on their activities.
That could be. There again, I have to be very, very careful when I don't have corroboration for anything in specific, but I would definitely say that the groups would love that, to have some media leaders in place who would make sure that this stuff never got out there.
Wasn't there I think on your website, which is compartmentalized so that you can, for those who want to go to the website, you can find out certain aspects, what's going on there. Mm-hmm. And one of the links was, I guess, some correspondence exchange between, I forget who the parties were. I think one individual's name was Sauer. Do you remember that at all?
Yes.
What was that all about? Can you tell us?
Well, Mark Sauer and Jim Okerbloom, and then there's the third reporter, but more those two than the third, for the last, 12 or so years, have published many, many articles saying that these are false memories. And I remember one years ago where there was a legislator in California who wanted to pass a ritual abuse law against ritual abuse, and there was some article making him look crazy, or just that there was no basis for that kind of a law. And then about, I guess, is it going on 2 or 3 years ago, I was providing a workshop, a little 3-hour workshop at a conference, a family violence conference here in San Diego, an international conference, a very large conference. It was a 3-hour workshop on treating survivors of ritual abuse, psychotherapy with survivors of ritual abuse. And Mark Sauer wrote a big article trying to make me look crazy, and even had the district attorney at the time, Finks, his name is Pfingst, was quoted in that article to say that he's going to have his investigators there at Dr. Lacter's workshop to see what I'm doing, and there was this huge effort to, in my opinion, an effort to shut me up, but that's really what was at the basis of that. The grand jury of San Diego was sent to my workshop. This is unheard of. We have such a thing called academic freedom here, where we're supposed to be able to share opinions in an academic setting. In fact, and I have the grand jury sitting in my workshop.
It's for peace of mind, Doc.
Unbelievable. And then there was also a attempt from some of the False Memory Syndrome Foundation people to get all of the sponsors, all of the co-sponsors for the conference to withdraw their support because of this workshop being offered. This is just a little 3-hour workshop on how to help these people. And so what was very interesting was that a lot of people wrote letters to the editor of the San Diego Union Tribune saying, what is this? Why is this Mark Sauer, reacting like this to a little 3-hour workshop? And, it sounds like he's trying to shut Dr. Lacter up, and why can't she talk about treating these survivors, and what the heck is going on here? And none of those articles got published. In fact, what happened was, none of those letters to the editor, got published. And in fact, the editorial staff gave those letters from those people, the people who wrote those letters, gave their letters to Mark Sauer, which is a breach of ethics.
Yep.
There's supposed to be a wall between the office that takes the letters to the editor and the person who wrote the article that they're complaining about, so that there can be some way of having this opinion be heard.
A dialogue,
and instead it was given to Mark Sauer, and then he wrote everybody letters back saying, this ritual abuse thing isn't real, and blah, blah, blah. So, that was very, very wrong.
But it does show, again, where there is, in the mainstream press, a reluctance or a really stark resistance about getting this kind of information out. And you have to sit back and just ask yourself, why? Why? What's the problem here?
Right.
And what are you hiding, and why are you hiding it, and are you part of it? And apparently the answer would be, yes.
Well, I can't go, and I could get myself with a nice healthy lawsuit if I say Mark Sauer is, yes, a part of it, but the question is definitely on the table.
No, and of course I've said that, so yes, I understand. But you do wonder why the resistance to pursue these matters. Well,
let me tell you just an interesting little story about this. What happened was there was a professor at one of the universities here, and I won't say her name so I don't get her in trouble, who had actually written a chapter in a sociology book on this hysteria, this ritual abuse hysteria. So she had been affected by all of the media reports saying that this is hysteria, that the therapists are crazy, that these memories are all false, that none of this stuff happened. She had believed that and actually contributed a chapter to a textbook about the social hysteria and believing this ritual abuse. She saw that article by Mark Sauer, and she called me, and she said, my God, why is he doing this to you? Now I wonder if I was wrong, if this was not hysteria, with such a effort to shut you up. There must be something of truth here, and she had me come and speak to her class. Well, so I thought that was really interesting.
Definitely.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but again, you said there was some kind of thing as what, academic freedom?
Yes, we're supposed to have academic freedom, and because of that, the workshop did go on. Luckily, the psychologist in charge of the Family Violence and Sexual Assault Institute, which was the main sponsor for that international conference on family violence, he wrote letters to the sponsors and said, this workshop will go on, and got good support for that. So luckily, we've kind of moved past the days when people were so intimidated by lawsuits that we, all just kind of were too careful. Now we can take a stand. Plus, we have all kinds of good research showing that many recovered memories are true, and and also there's some good documentation of some of the unethical practices of the false memory movement. So we were in a much better position to hold our ground, and we did, and the workshop went on, and the grand jury, I think, also saw that, we're not going to do anything here. And I think the actual people who were sent in from the grand jury, I think some of them were also sitting there going, why are we here? They seemed like nice people that were very, very confused and actually pretty interested in what was being taught.
About the false memory movement, as far as you know, to the best that you can speak to it, do you believe that it was created as an offensive against ritual abuse, or do you think it was legitimate and maybe was hijacked at some time or hijacked at certain points, not all the time? What was the deal with that?
Yeah, I am not sure who. I know Ralph Underwager was one of the founders. I'm not sure if he was the very first person to create it, and he was the man who showed his cards in some interview. I think it might have been in Sweden or Denmark, where it was some kind of pedophilia magazine, and he was interviewed and said something about there being nothing wrong with love between a man and a boy, or something to that effect. And if you read that interview, it looks that like his real motive was to protect pedophilia. But whether he was operating as kind of, from that personal issue, or whether he was part of something more organized, I'm not sure. Now, I do believe that many of the people who ended up having prominent positions in the False Memory Syndrome Foundation had ties to both ritual abuse and to the United States mind control project.
The reason I bring that up also is because in the case of the Franklin cover-up, are you familiar with that book at all?
Very.
All right.
Very familiar.
Okay, so here you go. You have, if I've got it right, you have a state senator and bringing this to light. And who does it involve but high-ranking people in a certain political party in that state? You have the police chief and you have the publisher of the Omaha newspaper involved in it. And, interestingly enough, there were no convictions. And interestingly enough, DeCamp, the author, John DeCamp, was never sued for anything, was never brought to civil court.
Yes. I think that the one conviction was of
Larry
man,
King.
Yeah, for tax problems, tax issues.
Right. Larry King went. That's
true.
And
then there was a lawsuit by one of the victims. I'm trying to remember if it was against Larry King. I think it was.
Okay.
And that victim did win that lawsuit for damages for the abuse that he suffered. And the judge that heard that lawsuit said that when she had first heard this case, she thought that the allegations were not true, that when the Franklin case first came out, but that years later, when she was the judge for this lawsuit, she realized that she was wrong and that these things had happened, and she ruled in favor of the person who filed the suit.
When did you become aware of that event?
Fibonacci. It's a few years ago. I'm not sure of the date right now, but Bonacci won that lawsuit.
All right, it was Paul Bonacci who did win that lawsuit.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, he was a principal in it, along with a woman, Alicia, and I can't remember her last name, and I won't try, but there's also...
Alicia Owen.
Alicia
It was
Owen.
a poor girl who testified as a minor. I think she was 15 years old when she testified to the grand jury about the abuse that happened to her, and she was jailed for perjury. Oh, my God, you know, if every child that tries to say, I was abused, could be jailed for perjury, then we just can throw our whole child protection system down the toilet. That is one of the scariest things I have ever heard, that girl sat in jail for years, and she did not recant. She was not going to say that what she said was not true. She held her ground, and that's very sad. I feel very sorry for her.
We'll never know. I mean, we overlook her courage to say, I'm not going to give states just because you want me to. I'm going to stick to my guns, and we all love those stories when we see them in the movies. But when you see a person like this have to go through it with really no light shed on it, she does it for herself, and we really don't understand. I think the guts that it takes to do something like what she had done, and hopefully somewhere down the line that woman may have hopefully a decent life for sure, as well as Bonacci also, and of course that whole situation's got another life, and I won't go into that now.
Right.
But I think you're aware that it also ties into Hunter S. Thompson's suicide, Rusty Nelson's being picked up, who was a photographer during those things.
That's right.
Yeah. But the thing
there were all these very suspicious deaths connected to that case.
That's
really,
right.
really scary
Yeah,
stuff.
Cartieri's plane crash, you're right. Yeah, plane crashes are always accidents, aren't they?
You're right.
The other thing also is that I think what that has done is Alex Jones has done an expose on Bohemian Grove. Are you familiar with that?
Yeah, and I've seen the video.
Okay.
And, it looks real to me, as far as I don't think he could have
fudged it, no.
Engineered. I mean, with it, he didn't have Steven Spielberg and his who's his technological guy, the guy who makes all the creatures and the visual effects.
I'm not paying attention. It's okay.
But if he didn't have them working for him, I don't think he could have pulled that off, because he's got thousands of people watching this this thing being burned and strange chanting and it's all. But even there, I would say that's not as deep as the stuff that I'm talking about when I use the word ritual abuse, because any ritual abuse group, well, first of all, they weren't really killing a person. They said it was an effigy. Then again, who knows whether it was or not.
Right.
They bring out this life-size thing wrapped in cloth and burn it in front of these thousands of chanting people, and who knows if that was really a person or an effigy. But I mean, it was pretty scary and pretty awful, but I definitely believe real human sacrifice is happening on a deeper level.
Well, I just bring it back to this point, and that is Bonacci not even knowing who Hunter Thompson was. Just stated, well, Hunter Thompson was there producing the snuff movies. Snuff as in somebody dies. And the graphic depiction by Bonacci was so graphic, in fact, that there was a riveting moment, Doc, when Alex Jones had John DeCamp on a couple of years ago, and DeCamp's reading from the book, and Jones says, whoa, wait a minute, that's Northern California, that's Bohemian Grove. And DeCamp goes, oh, I don't know what that is. So in that moment on the radio, they realized that where Bonacci had been was where Jones had been doing his work, and that is Bohemian Grove, which is a very strange occult place where the global elites go to act like very bad boys and girls. So that's another whole situation. But once again, I want to remind everybody you're listening to the Grassy Knoll on Dade City Micro Radio, AM 1610 WDCX. We have with us Dr. Ellen Lacter from the University of California at San Diego with us. She's a licensed clinical psychologist. The website, which is longer than anybody's anything, is truthbeknown2000.tripod.com. Just go there, or else just do a search, and you'll get there. Do you want to talk about the website a little bit, about the resources that are there?
Yeah, I started this website, I don't know, 6 or 7 years ago, and there's a lot of information here about Satanism and witchcraft, and there's some on the espionage projects, not all that much. I'm a little bit more careful with that stuff. There's stuff here that's helpful to people who are wondering if their abuse, if they may have more abuse than they thought. You know, they're starting to get some memories. They're going, oh my God, am I a victim of this too? There's indicator lists where they can read some symptoms that are often found in ritual abuse survivors and see how much they might fit with some of that. There's indicators for of ritual abuse in children. There's indicators of mind control. There's a very long article on working with abused children for therapists
who are
working with ritually abused children. And then there's some articles exposing some of the things that have happened in San Diego related to ritual abuse and the media's suppression of the evidence and a lot of different things.
One of the things I thought was key, you have an article up there for therapists, Lessons I Have Learned.
Mm-hmm.
I thought that was pretty interesting and informative also. There's another one there, and I'm looking through all these stacks of pages here. Let's see.
There's a mind control simple to complex.
That's it. I'm looking right at it. Yeah, I printed out 6 pages. That's really interesting, the Stockholm Syndrome, my goodness.
Mm-hmm. And that's pretty standard, the Stockholm Syndrome. I mean, you know, that would happen in a lot of cults that are publicly known, where the person really submits to their abusers and buys into the agenda of the abusers to survive. It happens sort of as an automatic reaction to being imprisoned and terrified.
Mm-hmm.
But the types of mind control that ritually abused people experience work at even a more binding, deeper level, where the person doesn't even remember what happened to them, and they also may not even know what they're doing. So they may be waking up at 3 in the morning and going to places and not knowing it, or coming back and going to sleep, and the next morning they don't even know they were out. That happens a lot. Or they may wake up at 4 in the morning and find that they're holding a telephone, and they're going, why am I holding a phone? I'm supposed to be sleeping, and just hang it up. And what they don't know is that 5 minutes before, another personality woke up, programmed to wake up at 3:55, called an 800 number, got reported in, got whatever new information they were supposed to get, and then that personality went away, and the person was supposed to go back to sleep, and it kind of didn't work properly because they found the phone in their hand, but they don't remember that they made the phone call. In fact, that was how I discovered the ritual abuse with one client. We had only gotten to memories of the familial sexual abuse with no ritual parts, but yet the person was starting to tell me about all these strange phone situations where the phone she would get all these hang-up calls on particular days that are associated with ritual abuse, and I started asking more questions. I said, I'm concerned about these calls. Instead of saying, well, hey, I don't know, I have no idea what that means, I said, I am concerned with the pattern of those calls, the fact that they're happening so much at these particular times, and, all these calls where nobody's there. And that investigation, that willingness to be concerned about that and to express that began to open up that whole other part of what had been happening to her.
One of the things I fear, and I talk about this in these terms with those I'm associated with,
mm-hmm.
but I will ask you this, if you can speak to it, should we assume that so many of our, what I call milk carton kids,
yes,
have been absconded for the purpose of ritual abuse. What's your thoughts on that?
Well, I think when Johnny Gosh was taken, which was, I don't remember if that was 87 or do you know that case?
Well, yeah, and that's real interesting how it ties into Thompson and Gannon. But go ahead, sure.
Yeah. I mean, and the Johnny Gosh case, in my opinion, is deeply connected to the Franklin cover-up.
Okay.
But when he was grabbed, trying to look up here when that was, he, I believe at that time, these groups were still grabbing kids off the street. That was 82.
Yeah,
okay, so that's 23 years ago. I don't think that these groups are doing anything that risky of exposure anymore. I think that a lot of the children who are sacrificed in rituals are brought in from third world countries. I think that or let's say you have a homeless person,
a runaway,
maybe not a child, because the child, if you have a homeless family, the parents are going to report that their child is missing, and they could risk exposure for that. But for instance, a homeless adult, an individual just walking in the streets alone, nobody's going to know that that person is gone. The shelter where he's been sleeping may know he didn't come back that night, but they would have no reason to suspect that he was dead. Those people may be grabbed. The other source for sacrifice is very often babies that are in utero for a person who's already a victim, and they'll force the delivery early, so 7 or 8 months gestation, and then that baby will be sacrificed, and then that person will be programmed to believe that she just had a miscarriage, and nobody will. So if people ask, well, my God, I thought you were going to have a baby, if she was even a person who had a public life. I think some of these people may not have a public life at all. They may just, nobody may know that they were pregnant. They may not have a job. They may just be kept somewhere, so that nobody would know that they were pregnant. But I think most of the babies that are sacrificed are deliveries before full term, and they're programmed to tell people that it was a miscarriage.
We've had a couple of high-profile cases lately of abductees and such. One, of course, in Florida, not very far from where I am right now. Do you feel that there is the old story, better reporting of abductions and the like, or do you think that there is a rise in abductions?
Well, I don't know that. I haven't been tracking that.
Okay.
And I definitely believe that some of the children who are abducted, a lot of them are horribly abused, and some of them are, on kind of a, within a very small group, or, an individual or a couple, they're tortured and ritually abused, but not in a very organized way, not a group that is much more careful not to be caught. One complaint that I do have about the whole law enforcement network is that there's not a effective centralized data source for the faces of the children used in the pornography that's seized. Because I think that a lot of the ritual abuse would be caught if that was done better. So if there was actually even an international data bank of the faces of children used in the child pornography, then when a child discloses that they were used in pornography, or even an adult says, hey, 15 years ago I was used in pornography, that somebody could look into that data bank and see, oh my gosh, this kid was used, and therefore we have to listen to their whole story about the fact that all these neighbors were abusing them, and that this was a ritual, a big cult or whatever. Because right now, when a child makes a disclosure related to ritual abuse, people tend to just not want to touch it with a 10-foot pole. They're afraid of being sued. Law enforcement district attorneys, everybody is afraid of negative press and lawsuits if they get involved with these cases. But so the kid is sort of discredited, and there's sort of pressure on the therapist to, to stay silent and to not even make the child abuse reports. I'd say there's pressure on the therapist to not even report it. But if we had a centralized data bank of the faces of children in the seized pornography, then, I have a bunch of kids I would like to be able to send to a place like that and go find this kid, because I think there's a good chance that child's face is there, and then all of the child's reports become something that people are going to have to listen to more.
Of all the specializations you could have gone into, you chose this one, or perhaps it chose you?
Yeah, it chose me. I think for most of us, just like it chose so many support people for survivors, even spouses or friends. When you hear somebody talk about this, like you were talking about when you listened to Kathleen Sullivan and how, it's caught you too.
Yes.
You've got the bug. When you really feel the pain of somebody who's been through this, and then the second set of pain that they have because the whole system is telling them that they're crazy and telling them to shut up, and nobody, all of the things that are in place in our society that are supposedly there to help, all give them the message of go away, I don't want to hear this, then, the sense of injustice. So if you have a heart at all, I just can't see you turning your back on it. In fact, people say, oh my God, how do you do this? That's so wonderful of you. And my response is, how can anybody not, if they really feel it, if they really get it, if they know it's true, if they've really met somebody and they can feel that, to turn away and not do anything is just horrible.
Reminds you of that line from Ohio by Neil Young, how can you run when you know?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's why a lot of us are undergoing this Orwellian ignorance of strength, because they would choose to hide their head in the sand and not know, because life is a whole lot more pleasant that way. But life just isn't that pleasant.
That's right.
Do you ever wake up in the middle of the night with a little bit of paranoia?
In the beginning, I looked a little nuts myself. When I first realized how large a problem this was, and that the mind control was being done, and that our own government was participating in torture to install mind control, and that there was an Aryan agenda group using mind control, and then there was another group trying to stop the Aryan group using mind control. And when I really realized how big this was and how effective the programming was and all of that, I became not clinically paranoid, but really acting a little strange. When I first came back from discovering all of that, I brought my husband into the center of the living room to whisper to him about the things I had learned, because I was afraid to stand near a window.
I know. Hey, listen, we're running out of time, and I appreciate you being here, but, we all have to confess once in a while waking up and being a little bit in trepidation, but, hey, that makes you human.
Right.
Dr. Lacter, thank you so much for being with us. I hope we will be together soon, and I'm going to track down some other people along these lines, and hopefully we can get a little light shown on this. Thank you so much for being with us.
Okay, thank you very much.
God bless and good night.
Okay, good night.